We are going to begin with the weather and another smothering heat wave for much of the country. This morning, more than 70 million people are waking up under heat alerts stretching all the way from Texas to Maine, and the Northeast could potentially see record-breaking temperatures today. Perhaps no one is feeling the impact of that heat more than flood-ravaged eastern Kentucky, where temperatures will feel like 95 to 100 degrees. For a week now, thousands there have been without power after historic rain and flooding. Crews are still working around the clock to get the power back on so people can have air conditioning during this heat wave. But for many who are still waiting for the floodwaters to recede, that could be much, much longer. We have full team coverage of the flooding and the heat. We're going to get to NBC News meteorologist Michelle Grossman with your forecast in just a moment. But let's begin with NBC News correspondent George Solis, who is on the ground in Lexington, Kentucky. George, good morning to you. So this heat, it's not only dangerous, it's also impacting the search and rescue efforts there in eastern Kentucky. What are you hearing from rescue crews?
Good morning, Joe. You not only have the heat bearing down on all of these groups working to help the people most impacted, you also have the emotional toll that it's now taking on them. Keep in mind, many of them, as you mentioned, are working around the clock, and they are contending with a lot of the same issues that are impacting a lot of the affected homeowners, right? They have little food, little water, and they're running on little sleep. And they're going into some of the roughest areas at this point. And on the subject of heat, well, they're trying their best to stay hydrated. They're trying their best to find those pockets of shade and taking those breaks when necessary. Yesterday, I spoke with the leader of a humanitarian group led by veterans who are going into some of these regions to help out people who have yet to see the National Guard or any other resource. And they are just heartbroken about some of the images that they are seeing. Here's what one member had to tell me.
We get like liquid IVs. We make sure they have their water, hydration, electrolytes. Today with the heat index, we're going to end an hour early just so we don't burn our volunteers out so we can continue tomorrow.
You can imagine a lot of these volunteers, Joe, are working beyond that. They are doing everything they can to get help to everyone impacted.
Thank goodness for those volunteers. You know, George, so many people lost almost everything in these floods. They lost friends and relatives. Now they're having to deal with these temperatures that could reach triple digits. So what is the state doing to make sure people are as safe as possible? Do they have the resources they need?
Yeah, one thing Governor Andy Beshear has been critical on is making sure that they get ahead of any other weather event after this flooding. He announced the opening of cooling centers, at least 8 in the region, which are so crucial, especially for seniors that are without power. And right now, the other thing is making sure they have water. And we have seen pallets and truckloads of water being carried into these regions, and in some cases being airdropped where there are still no roads or bridges to get into certain regions. And also on that, you also have the utility crews that have been working nonstop to restore power. And it's actually kind of impactful when you think about it. When we first got here, the outages were in the tens of thousands. They are now down to a few thousand in certain pockets. And that is crucial in helping to restore AC for those people that still have homes.
At a time they need it more than ever. You know, George, Kentucky was hit by those deadly tornadoes late last year, then the devastating floods, now this dangerous heat. You've been talking to us all week about the resiliency of these communities. How are they dealing just with challenge after challenge coming from Mother Nature?
Yeah, Joe, and this is one of those cases where the worst is bringing out the best in people. You have people who have been impacted by other weather events on the western side who have driven miles to help out their neighbors here on the eastern side of this state. They are bringing food, they are bringing water, they are bringing medical supplies. Sometimes you have complete strangers helping strangers, just there to listen to people who have been through the worst right now. And it is just such a show of solidarity and support. People here united in a way that is really just emotional in some cases. And I should mention, there's also a relief fund that the people of Kentucky have started. At this point, it has raised more than $3 million. Joe?
Very impressive. George Solis reporting from Bluegrass Country. George, thank you so much. Let's continue our coverage. Get a check on your morning news now, weather, what's happening in Kentucky and beyond. Michelle Grossman joins us. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, Joe. Good to see you. And we do have a heat advisory in Hazard. It was just a week ago where they saw 9 inches of rain in 12 hours. Still going through those recovery efforts, as George just showed us. So it's going to be a tough day there once again. We're looking at heat alerts for 73 million Americans. From the central and southern plains, Dallas, you've had 38 triple digits this summer. And you're so far the second warmest summer, so we're going to see what happens by the end of the summer. But these heat alerts stretch into the New England area, also the Northeast, into the Carolinas. So Boston, D.C., Philadelphia, you're going to see very warm temperatures. You factor in the humidity, it's going to feel brutal this afternoon. So Northeast sizzle, we're looking at temperatures into the 90s, but feeling like 100 in New York City by this afternoon. It's going to feel like 98 degrees in Boston, feeling like 103 in Baltimore. And we're going to see more of the same tomorrow. We have a cold front that's working to the east. I'll show you that in just a minute, but it's not going to get quite here yet. So Friday, we're looking at another warm day, 93 in Philadelphia. It's going to feel more like 100 by the afternoon. It's going to feel like 99 in New York City and feeling like 101 as far north as Providence. We're going to keep it toasty throughout the weekend as well. So that cold front moves through the east. Not much of relief. We're still going to see really high dew points as well. So Buffalo, you're going to be into the 80s. D.C. staying in the 90s. Now let's talk about the cold front that's moving through, because it is spurring some flood warnings this morning where you see the red here, and you can see why. We're seeing torrential rainfall. Rain rates of 1 to 2 inches per hour. Where you see the darker colors, especially the reds, especially the oranges, that's where we're seeing torrential downpours. We're seeing some lightning, hearing some thunder as well. And we're also looking at the chance show for some severe weather from New England all the way to Tennessee, where we could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Back to you.
All right, rain and heat. We know to keep an eye on it. Thank you, Michelle.
Sure.
Now to some breaking news. China has launched several ballistic missiles into water surrounding Taiwan after Beijing announced the start of live-fire military drills. The exercises come after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in a controversial trip that sparked condemnation and fury in Beijing. NBC News Digital reporter Rhoda Kwan joins us now from Taiwan's capital, Taipei. Rhoda, good to have you with us. So walk us through what's happening and what China is disclosing about these drills. How close are these missiles to the island, and how's Taiwan responding?
Yeah, so Chinese state media today said that it launched, quote, precision missile tests and that they had, quote, the intended effect. We don't really have the information on how close they were to the island of Taiwan. The Taiwan's defense ministry has confirmed that China's army did send 11 ballistic missiles to the north, south and east of Taiwan, starting at about 2 p.m. today. This is also the first time China has sent missiles into the waters around Taiwan since 1996 during the Third Taiwan Strait crisis. Taiwan's response has been to condemn these missile tests, and they've compared them to North Korea's missile tests, and they've also called on the international community to continue to show solidarity with Taiwan. So what we're seeing is a lot of military posturing around the waters of Taiwan.
All of this is coming, of course, after Speaker Pelosi's visit. What is the atmosphere like in Taiwan right now? Are people concerned that tensions with China could escalate further?
There's actually really no sign of panic here in the capital of Taipei. These drills, although they don't happen every day, they weren't unexpected, given China has been warning that they didn't want this trip to happen. What's to understand is that here in Taiwan, the Taiwanese have been living with the threat of a possible invasion from China for decades. So their response really is a much more measured one and a pragmatic one. And the Taiwanese government's messaging around this has also been very calm and very, very measured.
Countries all around the world are keeping an eye on what's going on here. I mean, what's the international reaction been like to these military drills that are happening?
Yeah, so neighbouring countries are definitely very concerned about these drills in the waters around Taiwan. Japan today has again expressed serious concerns. South Korea yesterday called for calm. The ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has also put out a joint statement today expressing concern that these drills will destabilize the region. And the foreign ministers of the G7 countries, they sent out a joint statement today telling China that there is no justification, a visit is not a justification for an aggressive military action like this, and they've called for China to not unilaterally change the status quo across the strait, and to call on China to resolve this by peaceful means.
All right, Rhoda, thanks so much for joining us this morning with this breaking news. We appreciate it. The Russian trial of WNBA star Brittney Griner appears to be coming to a close. Both sides are set to deliver closing arguments this morning. Griner's lawyers say we will also hear from her one last time before the trial wraps. She'll deliver final testimony in her own defense. At the same time, there are renewed calls this morning for Griner's release. The head coach of the WNBA's Las Vegas Aces, Becky Hammon, spoke out, sending a message to Russian officials.
See, Brittney being detained. like I said, it's upsetting. We want her to come home, so I just asked the Russian government to do the right thing. It's never too late to do the right thing, and I think at this point, like I said, whether she did or didn't, it's time to send her home.
For more on this, let's bring in NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobiea in London. So, Kelly, with the trial expected to wrap up today, how soon could we expect a verdict?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about that over the past couple of days, Joe. On Tuesday, one of Griner's defense team said that a verdict could come very soon, hinting that it could possibly come today. But today, as NBC News was talking to members of her defense, we were told that there could actually be more hearings, and we should be prepared for that. Basically, there is no set, cut and dried schedule here. It's up to the judge whether or not there will be additional hearings, whether they need to make time for perhaps Brittney Griner to once again address the court, or for more time for more witnesses, or for closing arguments. So we're basically at the mercy of the judge to find out when that verdict will be read. It could happen as early as today, according to Griner's defense attorneys, but then again, we may see even more hearings. Joe.
I mean, and Kelly, and Russian officials have repeatedly said they cannot discuss a trade until Griner's trial is complete. We know the White House proposed that prisoner swap, reportedly offering to release convicted Russian arms trafficker Victor Bout in exchange for Griner and another American detainee, Paul Whelan. The Biden administration said Russia made a bad faith response to that proposal. Where do those negotiations stand this morning? Do we know?
Well, it's not very clear, to be honest, Joe. We did hear from the State Department on Monday saying that they made a substantial and serious offer for a prisoner swap, and that Moscow came back with a counteroffer that was not serious. As well, the State Department said, look, we're not going to talk about details of any of these offers. We're not going to negotiate in public. And Moscow has said the same thing. On Tuesday, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov came forward and said, we're not engaging in megaphone diplomacy. We don't want to negotiate a deal in public. And they've said repeatedly that they have to wait for the legal process to play out before any talks, any sort of deal is struck. So really, this idea of a prisoner swap is sort of on hold until there is a verdict in the Griner case. And as I said, Joe, we're not sure if that'll happen as early as today. It's quite possible that there will be more hearings before we get to a verdict.
I mean, Kelly, as you mentioned, the Biden administration, they've discussed the negotiations publicly, but they're not giving many details, which is understandable with a sensitive situation like this. The Kremlin, you sort of touched on this. They've been warning about that approach. What can you tell us about that and the tensions over this?
Yeah, they've been warning about it repeatedly. They've said, do not pressure us in public. Do not put pressure to come up with some sort of prisoner swap. This is not the way we're going to discuss this. If a swap does happen, they keep using this term megaphone diplomacy. We don't want to talk about this trading possible deals or negotiations or putting pressure on Moscow via the airwaves, via, public press briefings, and that if it does continue, it could put any deal to bring Brittney Griner home in jeopardy. That has been the line from Russia throughout this process, and it was repeated again on Tuesday, Joe.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much. We want to take a closer look at the legal aspects of Griner's case. So for that, let's bring in NBC News legal and MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. Glenn, good morning. Good to have you with us. So we know her legal team has said that Brittney Griner's search at the airport was improper, that she was not informed of her rights upon her arrest. So even in a Russian court where, 99% of people are convicted, do you think that could be an effective defense?
It doesn't feel like it will be, Joe. This has the feel of a movie where you already know the ending and it's not a happy ending. Now, that being said, they are still calling witnesses in Brittney Griner's defense. It's different than an American trial because she's pleaded guilty to the charge. And yet they are still putting on witnesses. They put on an expert Russian forensic chemist to testify that the analysis of the suspected drugs did not even comply with Russian law. They're also putting on witnesses like Brittney Griner's teammates, her doctor. And let's remember, she was authorized to use this cannabis oil for medical pain management purposes here in the United States, but apparently or allegedly it violates Russian law. So it feels like a foregone conclusion, and it's not a surprise that the State Department characterizes her as being wrongfully detained.
Which means this might all come down perhaps to the sentence. We know Griner pleaded guilty to the drug charges, hoping that by taking responsibility she could receive some leniency. In this case, do you think that was the right move? I mean, if she's convicted, could that have some impact on her sentence?
You know, it's hard to figure out what is the right move in a Russian court, given, as you say, nearly a 100% conviction rate. It doesn't really have the feel of a truly legitimate criminal justice system. And I think it's worth remembering that she was taken into custody by the Russian authorities at about the same time that Russia invaded Ukraine. So it feels like she's being used as a political or diplomatic pawn. But I have to believe her defense team is sort of making the best play it can to try to seek, you know, a lenient sentence for her. And we're about to see how that turns out.
So Griner is expected to take the stand today, knowing what we've been discussing here over the last few minutes, knowing this is not like your typical American trial. If you were representing her, what would you advise her to say?
Well, she's already pleaded guilty, so I do think you have to express remorse. I think you have to apologize if, in fact, she broke the laws of Russia. And then she has to hope for the best. It does sound like they've put on some character testimony, like I say, from her teammates and the team director. So perhaps the judge will have leniency on her. But given the talk of a potential swap, Brittney Griner, for some Russian prisoners that we have here in the United States, you know, you feel like this sentence might ultimately be used as leverage for political purposes.
All right, Glenn Kirshner, appreciate your analysis this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Turning now to the NFL and the ongoing controversy surrounding Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson. Earlier this week, Watson was given a 6-game suspension by a disciplinary officer appointed by the league and the Players Association. But yesterday, the league announced it's appealing that decision, calling for a tougher penalty for violating the league's personal conduct policy. Watson is accused of sexual assault and sexual misconduct by some 24 women. He has denied any wrongdoing. In a statement, the NFL said Commissioner Roger Goodell will determine who will hear the appeal. Under the league's collective bargaining agreement, Goodell can consider the appeal himself or can appoint a designee to do so. On Capitol Hill, tributes are pouring in for Indiana Congresswoman Jackie Walorski. She died in a car accident yesterday, along with 2 staffers. The White House is flying its flags at half-staff after President Biden offered his condolences in a statement last night. NBC News senior congressional reporter Scott Wong joins us now. So, Scott, how is Congresswoman Walorski being remembered? What are we hearing from the president and from those who knew her and worked with her on Capitol Hill?
Well, Joe, I covered Congresswoman Walorski for a number of years when in covering the House of Representatives. There are 2 types of lawmakers on Capitol Hill. There are show horses and workhorses. And Congresswoman Walorski definitely was a workhorse. She was somebody who operated behind the scenes. She held powerful positions on committees, the Ways and Means Committee, Armed Services. And then she was also the top Republican on the Ethics Committee, a tough assignment because that's the committee that investigates potential wrongdoing by your fellow members of Congress. Kevin McCarthy, who put her on that committee and appointed her, called her tough but fair, a no-nonsense straight shooter who knew that Congress must reflect the will of the people with decency and honesty. You mentioned President Joe Biden weighing in with the statement. He wrote, "We may have represented different parties and disagreed on many issues, but she was respected by members of both parties for her work on the House Ways and Means Committee, on which she served. She also served as co-chair of the House Hunger Caucus, and my team and I appreciated her partnership." Now, 2 other of her staffers also were in the car and died in that 2-car collision in her northern Indiana district. Just another reminder of how dangerous some of these jobs in Congress can be as members travel and put on thousands and thousands of miles on their vehicles particularly in these rural districts, Joe.
An important reminder, no doubt more tributes will be pouring in the coming days. Scott, let's turn our attention to politics now. That $740 billion reconciliation bill. We know the Senate parliamentarians currently reviewing the text, which is an incredibly important part of this process. So where do things stand? Are Democrats bracing for the possibility of even more changes?
Yeah, I think they are. I think we can expect that there will be some changes, whether they are tweaks or substantive changes. We're not quite sure. Democrats and Republicans have been meeting with the Senate parliamentarian behind closed doors in a pretty, secretive closed door process all week now. What they're trying to figure out is whether or not certain elements of this massive climate and economic package can remain. She makes the call whether or not these various portions of the package can pass muster. So that's sort of what's happening behind the scenes. Now, separately, Kyrsten Sinema, the moderate Democrat from Arizona, is quietly behind the scenes raising objections to certain parts of the package as well. She wants a long-held position she's had was that she's opposed to closing a special tax loophole that helps private equity and hedge fund managers, allows them to pay lower taxes. She's opposed to closing that loophole. She also wants some more money for wildfire prevention and resiliency. So obviously, wildfire is a big issue and drought a big issue in Arizona.
Scott, real quickly while we have you, I also want to ask you about this subpoena handed down to Donald Trump's former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, by the Justice Department. So this is part of the DOJ's investigation into the January 6th insurrection. What can you tell us about that?
I mean, at this moment, I really see this as a handoff from the January 6th committee, which is starting to wind down, moving into their report writing mode away from the public hearings. And now DOJ is really ramping up. And so we have seen a number of action from the DOJ, including now, taking a hard look at Cipollone. We know from the previous testimony to the January 6th committee, Cipollone was there in the White House in key moments related to January 6th, specifically when there was an effort to try to install Trump allies into DOJ to launch a widespread investigation into voter fraud. Separately, on January 6th itself, he did not want Trump to go to the Capitol to join the protesters because he believed that could open up President Trump and the White House to greater legal and criminal exposure. And finally, Joe, he's also, when the riot began, Cipollone, if you remember, said that we have to go tell President Trump to stop this, to intervene, to say something, to get the rioters to go home, because if not, then people in the White House would have blood on their hands. Joe.
All right, Scott, a lot to cover in Washington this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.